The stars outside the viewport were nothing but pinpricks of light scattered across the infinite black expanse. Inside the cockpit, Ronan's fingers gripped the controls with an unshakable tension, his eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of the alien ship ahead. The comms buzzed with static as the emergency beacon pulsed in his earpiece. The message had been simple: save her, or she dies. Ronan had heard that message before, and each time, it had meant something different. But this time, there was a cost. The voice that crackled through the comms was one he would never forget. "You're the only one who can do this," Zara's voice, strained and desperate, cut through the static. "Please, Ronan. You must save me." He hated hearing her like that, weak, vulnerable. The princess of the Eryxian Empire. A woman who had once held herself like a deity among her people, untouchable. Now, she was a pawn, her life hanging by the thinnest of threads. She had no idea that Ronan had risked everything for this moment, no idea that his emotions were as tangled in this mission as the tangled knots in his mind. But that didn't matter now. There was only the mission. Ronan steered his battered shuttle closer to the enemy ship, his mind calculating the odds. A lone human soldier, taking on an entire fleet. It was madness. But in the space between madness and survival, there was no choice. His heart stuttered in his chest, the image of Zara's face flashing in his mind. Long silver hair, those violet eyes that gleamed like twin galaxies. The fire that had once ignited a battle between their cultures was now nothing more than a whispered promise, a blood debt he could never escape. He swore to protect her. Now, he would. The enemy ship loomed larger as he engaged the thrusters, evading incoming fire with practiced ease. The shield warning blinked in red, his time was running out. As he entered the final stretch, a voice crackled through his comms once more. "You've been warned, Ronan," the cold voice of the Eryxian commander echoed. "Turn back now, or we'll destroy everything you've ever cared for." Ronan didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the controls. He was done listening. In a flash of brilliance, a wave of laser fire streaked toward his shuttle, rocking the small craft violently. Sparks flew from the console, but Ronan fought to keep the ship steady. He cursed under his breath, his hands moving almost instinctively as the craft shuddered again, the hull beginning to buckle under the pressure. "Zara." Ronan's voice cracked with urgency as he pushed the shuttle closer to the docking bay. "I'm here." Her voice was a mere whisper, strained but filled with quiet determination. "You're almost there, just." A blast rocked the shuttle again, sending Ronan slamming back into his seat. His vision blurred, but he didn't flinch. He had been through worse. The ship was damaged, but there was no turning back now. The docking bay doors opened just in time. With a violent jolt, the shuttle slammed into the bay, the landing gears screeching against the floor as Ronan swiftly disengaged the thrusters and bolted out of his seat. He wasn't sure if the craft could hold together for much longer, but he didn't care. He had a mission to complete. Ronan grabbed his blaster, checked the clip, and moved toward the shuttle's airlock. He wasn't alone anymore. The heavy door to the bay slid open, and Zara appeared, her radiant skin now streaked with dirt and blood, her royal robes tattered and scorched. Her silver eyes locked onto his, the moment hanging between them like a storm cloud before it broke. He was there. He had made it. But as he took a step toward her, Zara raised her hand to stop him. "You've done it, Ronan," she said, her voice tight with unspoken emotions. "You saved me. But there's a price." He didn't speak at first, his heart racing in his chest. The words lingered between them, a heavy burden neither of them wanted to bear. What could she ask of him now? What was left? "I promised you, didn't I?" Zara continued, her voice almost a whisper. "I said I would reward you. But you have to understand, this is the only way." Ronan stared at her, confusion clouding his mind. "Reward? What are you talking about?" "I just pulled you out of hell, Zara. What else could there be?" Zara's gaze dropped for a moment, her jaw tightening. When her eyes met his again, there was something different there, something darker, more resigned. Ronan, she began, the only way for me to survive this, the only way for my people to survive is if you marry me. His pulse thundered in his ears. The words hummed between them, hanging in the air like an inescapable gravity. Marry her? His mouth went dry. You're asking me to marry you? His voice came out too hoarse, too raw. Why? Why me? Because you're the only one who can, Zara said, the vulnerability in her tone almost breaking him. Without an alliance through marriage, my people will fall into civil war. The factions will tear us apart. And I'll be nothing more than a symbol. I don't want to be a symbol, Ronan. I want to fight with you. With us. Ronan felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had saved her life. But now, she was asking him to bind himself to her for all eternity. His mind raced, his instincts telling him to run, but his heart told him to stay. And what do you think happens after the war is over, Zara? Do I get to walk away then? He asked, his voice low. Zara's expression softened, and her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. But I can't let my people die because of me. And I can't let you walk away after everything we've shared. The words sliced through him, sharper than any blaster fire. Ronan didn't know what he was feeling anymore. Was it love? Was it duty? He didn't know. But one thing was clear, whatever this was, it would change everything. Forever. Ronan took a step forward, his breath steadying. The price of life. He could feel the weight of it in his chest, the pressure of her expectations pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The tension between them was thick enough to suffocate. The metallic scent of ozone hung thick in the air, lingering from the blast that had rocked the ship just hours earlier. Ronan stood at the edge of the observation deck, his eyes scanning the swirling cosmos beyond, his mind as turbulent as the stars themselves. The black void stretched endlessly, an abyss of questions, answers, and promises yet to be broken. Zara had retreated to the private quarters, and though Ronan had promised her he would follow, he hadn't yet moved. His boots scraped softly against the cold floor as he turned to look at the woman who had both saved and damned him. His chest tightened at the thought. Her words echoed in his mind, each one a weight pulling him deeper into the unknown. Marry me. She had offered him salvation, yes, but at what cost? How far would she expect him to go in this alliance? A part of him wanted to pull away, to reclaim control over his life. But another part, an aching, unspoken part, wanted to step forward and say yes. He had never been good at denying Zara. A low hum broke the silence as the door to his quarters slid open. There she stood, her silhouette framed by the dim lights of the hallway, her silver hair cascading around her shoulders like liquid moonlight. The sharp lines of her face softened in the low glow, and for a moment she seemed as fragile as a leaf in the wind. Zara stepped into the room, her posture regal but hesitant. She had changed into a loose-fitting tunic, the soft fabric falling over her slender frame in a way that made Ronan's pulse quicken. Her violet eyes, once so fierce, now held a certain vulnerability, like a warrior without her armor. I know you're angry, she said, her voice soft, yet filled with an undeniable strength. And I understand why. Ronan didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. Words felt like a betrayal in the face of the storm raging inside him. His hands clenched at his sides as he took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. You're asking me to marry you. To give up my life, my freedom, for an empire that doesn't even understand its own purpose. What do you expect me to do, Zara? The space between them seemed to grow, the tension thick, charged with unspoken truths. Zara held his gaze, unwavering. I expect you to save us. To save me. His eyes narrowed. And if I say no? Zara's lips parted, her breath catching for a moment. If you say no, Ronan, my people will fall into chaos. The war will tear us apart. And I will never forgive myself for allowing it to happen. Ronan's heart pounded in his chest. He could see the weight of the decision in her eyes. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about them. This was a war, an empire teetering on the edge of destruction. And Zara, despite her royal blood, was just as much a pawn as anyone else. He moved closer, his anger mixing with something else, something he wasn't ready to confront yet. "You think this is about saving you," he said, his voice low and raw. "It's not. You want me because I'm the one who can fix everything, because I'm the only one who's stupid enough to make the sacrifice." Zara recoiled as though struck, her face pale, the hardness in her eyes faltering for just a moment. She was fighting something deeper than he could understand, something personal, something that had been shaping her life long before he came into the picture. But that didn't stop him from feeling betrayed. He had thought, once upon a time, that she might need him for something more than just this. That the connection they shared, even in the darkest of moments, meant something real. "I need you, Ronan," she said quietly, the words barely a whisper. "And it's not just about the Empire. It's about the lives that hang in the balance. It's about us." He stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. There it was again, us. He had spent years running from the notion of partnership, of union. He didn't trust it. Didn't trust her, even as the desire to hold her, to claim her, gnawed at him. "You don't even know what you're asking me to give up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen things, done things, that you'll never understand. And yet you think a title, a crown, can undo all that? Can make it worth it?" Zara stepped forward then, closing the distance between them with a fluid grace that made his heart ache. Her fingers brushed lightly over his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to fade away. His breath hitched as he felt her touch, warm, real. A jolt of electricity coursed through his veins, but it was not a mere physical reaction. It was the echo of something older, deeper. Something he had denied for too long. "I know more than you think," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I know you, Ronan. Better than anyone ever has. You think I don't see the man you are behind the mask you wear? You think I can't see that you're fighting yourself every day? You don't have to do this alone." Her words struck a chord deep within him. She wasn't just asking him to save her empire, she was asking him to save himself, to forgive himself. And for the first time, he wondered if that was even possible. Could he forgive the man he had become? Could he allow himself to hope again? But then, as quickly as the softness had appeared in her eyes, it was gone, replaced with the hard, cold resolve he had come to know so well. "You know what this means," she said, her voice firm once again. "You know what's at stake. If you refuse, everything will crumble. My people will lose faith in me. And that will destroy us." Ronan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He could see it all, the war, the chaos, the lives destroyed in the wake of their failure. But at what cost? He had already given so much. Was he willing to give more? Could he trust her, trust anyone, enough to risk everything for a dream of peace that seemed too distant, too impossible? He turned away from her, pacing the room in frustration. His emotions swirled like a storm, and the silence between them felt suffocating. Finally, he stopped and faced her once again. "Give me a reason," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Give me a reason to believe in this, in us." Zara didn't answer immediately. She stood there, her shoulders squared, her expression unreadable. And then, with a quiet strength, she spoke the words that would change everything. "I can't promise you peace, Ronan," she said softly, "but I can promise you the fight of your life. And I swear, you won't regret it." His heart pounded against his ribcage, and for the first time in years, he didn't know whether he was walking toward salvation or into damnation. The heavy hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the floor beneath Ronan's boots as he stood alone in the observation bay. The stars outside flickered like distant embers in the cold blackness, a cruel reminder of the void that separated him from everything he had ever known. A life of freedom, of choice. But that life seemed increasingly distant now, as though it were slipping through his fingers, no matter how tightly he gripped it. He had made his decision. At least, that's what he told himself as he stared at the swirling nebulae outside, trying to steady his breathing, to block out the storm within. His mind churned with the words Zara had spoken, the promises of peace, the threats of war, the expectations of what he could become. His body, his very being, still recoiled at the idea of marrying her. It felt like a bargain with his soul. Yet, when he closed his eyes, the image of Zara's face, vulnerable yet resolute, haunted him. The door slid open behind him, and he didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her presence filled the room like an unspoken command. Zara. Ronan. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, like a blade half-drawn. He exhaled sharply and faced her, his gaze steely. She was dressed in the flowing robes of her people, their fabric shifting like liquid silver. There was no mistaking her beauty, but it was something more now, something otherworldly. She wasn't just a woman. She was a princess, a leader, a symbol of everything he was about to sacrifice. Her violet eyes searched him, as if trying to decipher his thoughts. "Have you made your decision?" He clenched his jaw, the word sticking in his throat. Yes. It came out flat, colder than he had intended. But there was no turning back. Not now. She nodded slowly, her lips tight, but her expression betrayed a flicker of relief. "I knew you would." The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, things neither of them could ask. What did this mean for them? For their futures? For the war? The weight of it hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Zara's voice broke the quiet again. "There's something you should know. Something about this marriage." Ronan raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued despite himself. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before lifting it to meet his. There was an honesty in her eyes now, raw and unguarded. "It's not just for appearances. It's not just a political move. There is an ancient law in my people's history, one that binds the ruler to their chosen consort. A law that demands more than just a name on paper." He frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean, demands more?" Zara's voice softened, a dangerous seriousness in her tone. "It's a bond, Ronan. A real bond. One that connects us in ways you cannot yet understand. It's not just about the war or the throne. It's about our lives, our souls. I'm offering you not just the Empire's future, but my own. And if you choose to accept it, there will be no turning back." His chest tightened, a heavy, oppressive sensation that made it hard to breathe. A bond. He had known the stakes, but this was different. He wasn't sure what terrified him more, the implications of her words, or the realization that, despite his resolve, a part of him wanted to take that step. "You're telling me that this marriage isn't just a title?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," she said, her gaze never leaving his. "It's much more than that. In the eyes of my people, in the eyes of the gods, it will bind us together, heart, body, and mind. It's a pact, not just a duty. I will share my power with you, and you will share yours with me. But it will not be easy, Ronan. It will change everything." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not the man you think I am, Zara. I'm not some noble hero. I've done things, horrible things. You're asking me to walk into a future that's bound to break us both." She closed the space between them, her movements graceful but determined. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his chest, her fingers warm against his skin. "I know who you are," she said, her voice a quiet, fierce determination. "And I've seen the man you could be. The one you're trying so hard to bury." Her touch sent a jolt through him, igniting something he hadn't felt in years, something raw and real. He could feel her heartbeat beneath his fingers, as though they were already connected, already intertwined. The truth of it hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about saving her people. It was about him, about them, and the undeniable truth that there was no going back now. Zara looked up at him, her violet eyes dark with unspoken promises. We can fight together, Ronan. We can change this war, this empire. But only if you let me in. Only if you trust me. He felt the weight of her gaze on him, and for a long moment, he didn't know what to say. The fear that had driven him for so long, fear of commitment, fear of being vulnerable, began to crumble, piece by piece. Zara was right. He had been running from this, from the one thing that could truly save him. With a deep breath, Ronan took her hand in his, holding it tightly. I don't know if I can trust anyone again, he said, his voice raw. But I'm willing to try. Zara smiled, a glimmer of something softer in her expression. That's all I ask. The door slid open again, and this time, it wasn't just a gesture of intimacy, it was the beginning of something larger. The galaxy waited for them both, full of possibilities and dangers, of allies and enemies. But as Ronan stood there, hand in hand with Zara, he realized that the real battle wasn't just against the forces outside. It was the one raging inside him, the war between his fear and his desire for something more. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, or how this bond would shape them. But he knew this, he would no longer face it alone. The storm outside raged as the ship sliced through the nebulous expanse of space. Thunder clapped, an unnatural phenomenon that vibrated through the steel walls of the ship's hull. Ronan stood at the observation window, staring at the swirling chaos of colors outside, his mind a mirror of the storm within. The past few days had been a blur of planning, negotiations, and the constant pull of doubt gnawing at him. But there was no more time for hesitation. The moment was upon him, and he couldn't turn away from it. Zara entered quietly, her presence always commanding despite her graceful silence. She was no longer the untouchable princess from before, there was something else in her now. Something softer. A vulnerability she rarely let show, but one that he had seen in fleeting moments, the way her eyes softened when she spoke to him, the way her voice trembled when she thought he wasn't listening. Ronan, she said, her voice warm but laced with concern. We need to talk. He turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. It was just the two of them. The weight of the promise they had made together pressed down on his chest, but this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a challenge, a test they would either pass together or fall apart. About what? He asked, his voice low and steady, but a flicker of uncertainty crept through his words. Zara crossed the room to stand beside him, the air around her charged with an intensity that mirrored his own. About what happens next. The war. The alliance. And what we're becoming. Ronan sighed, turning back to the window. Outside, the universe stretched endlessly, vast and unknowable. It seemed fitting. Here they were, on the edge of the unknown, and all they had to rely on was each other. What do you want from me, Zara? I've already made my choice. I'll marry you, I'll fight for your people. But I'm not the man you think I am. I'm not some hero. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. I never thought you were. I've seen what you've been through, Ronan. The things you've done. But you're not that man anymore. I can see it in you. His heart skipped. The words cut deep, but in a way, they were the truth. He had changed since meeting her, had wanted to change. But the road ahead wasn't easy, and the scars of his past didn't disappear simply because he wished them away. You don't know the half of it. I've killed people, innocent ones. My hands are stained. I know, she said, her tone gentle, yet unwavering. But that doesn't define you, Ronan. What matters is what you do now. What we do together. Her words hung in the air, the promise of something better, something they could build together. He didn't know if he believed it yet, but the thought of it, of fighting alongside her, of standing at her side not just as a protector but as an equal, sparked something deep within him. Something raw, but alive. Zara took a step closer, her eyes searching his, as if seeking a deeper truth. You don't have to fight this battle alone. I know what it's like to feel the weight of an entire people on your shoulders. You've been alone for too long, Ronan. Let me help you. Let me show you that there's another way. Her words pulled at him, and despite his instincts to pull away, he felt the pull toward her. He wanted to believe her. To believe in the possibility of redemption, of healing. But there was a part of him still terrified that if he let go of his fear, if he let her in completely, he would lose himself. Again. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to let go of everything I've built to protect myself. Zara's gaze softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against his forearm. You don't have to let go of it all, Ronan. Just enough. Enough to trust in me. In us. Her touch sent a jolt of warmth through him, spreading like fire through his veins. It was the simplest gesture, but it was enough. Enough to melt the walls he had spent years building around himself. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. I'm scared, Zara, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can trust anyone, not even you. But I want to. I want to believe in something again. She stepped even closer, her body almost flush against his now. Her breath was warm against his skin, and for a moment, the world outside the ship didn't exist. There was only Zara, her presence, her energy, the way she made him feel like he wasn't the man he had been. You can trust me, she said softly, her words a promise, a vow. And I'll show you that you can. No matter what happens next. The space between them seemed to shrink, and the pull he felt toward her was undeniable. But this time, it wasn't just the physical desire that called to him, it was the emotional connection that had been forming since the moment they had met. The bond they were forging wasn't just about their marriage, or the war, or the political stakes. It was about the person standing in front of him, someone who, despite everything, saw something in him worth saving. Without thinking, without second-guessing himself, he leaned in, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both tentative and fierce. A kiss that spoke of promises yet to be fulfilled, of fears still lurking in the shadows, but also of something more. Of hope. Zara kissed him back, her arms winding around his neck, pulling him closer. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm of emotions crashing through him now. He had never allowed himself to feel this vulnerable, this open, but in her arms, he felt like he could breathe again. When they finally pulled away, breathless, Ronan rested his forehead against hers, his hands trembling slightly as he cupped her face. I'm not sure what I'm doing. But I know I want to do it with you. Zara smiled, a soft, almost playful smile that warmed his heart. Then let's face it together. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, in that moment, Ronan felt a shift. There was no more running. No more hiding. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side.